The frontier town auction drew its usual crowd of bargain hunters and gawkers, but Rowan McCade stood apart, his calloused hands deep in worn pockets. He'd come for tools, perhaps a plowshare if the price was right, not for the woman standing on the platform with a burlap sack covering her head. Damaged goods, the auctioneer barked. But she can cook and clean well enough. What am I bid? Men laughed, tossing insulting offers of tobacco plugs and worn boots. The woman's shoulders stayed straight despite the humiliation, her dignity intact beneath rough cloth. Something in her posture, defiant yet weary, stirred recognition in Rowan's chest. When she spoke her name through the sack, Leora Hale. His breath caught. $2. He bid $2 silver. The laughter died. Real money for what they'd considered a joke. As Rowan stepped forward to claim his purchase, he wondered if he'd just bought trouble or redemption. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The walk from the auction platform to Rowan's wagon stretched longer than any trail he'd ever cut through timber. Leora moved carefully beside him, the burlap sack still covering her head, her hand barely touching his offered arm for guidance. Men lounged outside McCready's saloon, their crude comments following the pair like dust devils down the street. Got yourself a mystery bride there. McCade, someone called out. Hope she's worth $2 whole. Rowan kept his pace steady, neither rushing nor slowing. He'd learned long ago that reacting to such men only fed their sport. At his wagon, he helped Leora climb onto the bench seat, noting how she moved with practiced caution, as if she'd grown accustomed to navigating blind. Once they passed the town limits and entered the forest road, Rowan finally spoke. I'd like to remove that sack, Miss Hale, if you'll permit it. Her hands clenched in her lap. You might regret that kindness. Let me be the judge. The afternoon sun filtered through pine branches as he stopped the wagon. Carefully, as if handling something precious and fragile. Rowan lifted the burlap away. Leora's eyes stayed closed. Her face turned slightly to hide the scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw, a raised, pink line that pulled at the corner of her mouth. It's you, he breathed, and her eyes snapped open in surprise. You recognize me. Spring before last. Sage Creek flooded during the melt. You pulled me from the water when my horse threw me. The memory crystallized, a woman's strong hands dragging him to shore, her voice telling him to breathe, to stay awake. I looked for you after, to thank you proper. Leora's fingers traced her scar unconsciously. This happened the week after. Rancher Morrison's son didn't take kindly to being refused. Said I'd be easier to look at with some character carved into my face. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. Well, he was wrong. You look just fine to me. For the first time since he'd bought her freedom, Leora truly looked at him, this quiet lumberjack with kind eyes and patient hands. When he offered his canteen, she accepted it, drinking deeply of the cool water. Where are you taking me? She asked. Home, Rowan said simply, clicking to the horses. My cabin's nothing fancy, but it's warm and safe. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The cabin emerged from the forest like something grown rather than built, solid pine logs fitted tight, a stone chimney releasing a thin trail of smoke into the evening air. Rowan had constructed it himself over 3 winters, each log chosen and placed with the patience of a man who understood that good things took time. Now, leading Leora to its threshold, he felt suddenly conscious of its simplicity. It's just one room, he said, almost apologetically, as he pushed open the heavy door. Leora stepped inside, taking in the sparse but clean space, a rope bed in one corner with a patchwork quilt, a cast-iron stove with nickel trim gleaming from regular polishing, shelves holding a few dishes and preserves in ball mason jars. A single kerosene lamp sat on the rough sawn plank table, its clear chimney catching the last of the daylight. She stopped just inside the doorway, turning to face him with unexpected firmness. I won't be a kept woman, Mr. McCade. Whatever you paid for me, I'll work to repay it. Rowan studied her for a moment, This woman who'd saved his life and asked for nothing, who now stood in his home demanding dignity, even after being sold like livestock. He moved to the corner where he stored fabric and supplies, pulling out a length of store-bought curtain material decorated with small roses. "Then you'll be a boarder," he said, stringing a rope across the room and hanging the curtain to create 2 spaces. "Until you decide different. You take the bed. I'll sleep in the storage lean-to out back. It's weather-tight, and I've slept in worse places." "That's not necessary." "It is," he interrupted gently. "You've been given no choices lately. I aim to change that." Something shifted in Leora's expression, a loosening of the tight wariness she'd worn like armor. "Then I'll earn my keep. Cooking, mending, tending a garden if you've got seeds. I know herbs and medicines too, from my father. He was a doctor, before—" She trailed off. "Before doesn't matter here," Rowan said, pulling out 2 tin plates and cups. "Are you hungry? I've got beans and cornbread from yesterday." They sat at his simple table as darkness settled outside. The kerosene lamp cast a warm glow between them, while Leora ate with the careful appreciation of someone who'd known hunger, between small bites. She began to share fragments of her story, not the whole truth yet, but enough. She'd been accused of poisoning Rancher Morrison, though she'd tried to warn him about the spoiled meat. His son had wanted her gone anyway after she'd refused his advances. And when Morrison died, the son saw his opportunity. "I've been sold 4 times since then," she said quietly, staring at her hands. "Each time, someone would recognize me from the wanted posters, and I'd be bundled off to the next town, the next auction. The sack over my head was to keep buyers from seeing the scar and asking questions." Rowan listened without interrupting, refilling her cup when it emptied, adding another piece of cornbread to her plate when she finished the first. He didn't press for more details, didn't demand the full story. There would be time for that later, when trust had grown stronger between them. "You'll help me with the cutting," he asked finally, changing the subject to practical matters. "Not the heavy work, but measuring and marking. I lose half a day sometimes going back and forth to check my measurements." "I can do that," Leora agreed, relief visible in her shoulders. "And I can read and cipher, if you need help with tallying." "That'd be useful. The lumber company always seems to come up short on their counts." As the evening deepened, they established the simple rules of their arrangement. Leora would manage the domestic work, cooking, cleaning, mending his clothes that she noted were barely holding together. She'd help with the lumber business where she could. In exchange, she'd have shelter, food, and safety. Neither spoke of how long this arrangement might last. When exhaustion finally showed in the dark circles under her eyes, Rowan stood. "I'll get my bedroll from the lean-to. There's water in the pitcher for washing, and I'll knock before coming in tomorrow morning." "Mr. McCade," Leora called as he reached the door. "Why did you bid on me, really?" He paused, considering his answer. "Been living alone out here 3 years since my brother died in a logging accident. Today, standing in that crowd, watching those men laugh at another person's misery. I remembered what it felt like when someone reached out a hand to save me from drowning. Figured maybe it was my turn to do the reaching." After he left, Leora sat in the lamplight for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rough grain of the table. For the first time in over a year, she wasn't running, wasn't being sold, wasn't hiding. The cabin was simple, yes, but it was warm and safe, just as he'd promised. She moved to the window and peeked through the flour sack curtains, seeing the soft glow of a lantern from the lean-to where Rowan was settling in for the night. A man who'd given up his bed without being asked, who'd hung a curtain for her privacy, who looked at her scarred face without flinching. Perhaps, she thought as she prepared for bed, she'd finally found a place where her past couldn't follow. The thought was fragile as spring ice, but she held it carefully, nurturing this first small seed of hope. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and the forest settled into its nighttime rhythms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning his routines, proving her worth. staying ahead of whoever might still be hunting her. But tonight, for the first time in memory, Leora Hale fell asleep without fear. The morning would find them both adjusting to the strange comfort of another person's presence, Rowan conscious of his movements in the lean-to, trying not to wake her. Leora rising before dawn out of habit, starting the coffee in the dim pre-light. They would move around each other carefully, two people learning to share space after so long alone. But that was still hours away. For now, there was just the quiet cabin in the woods, two wounded souls separated by a rose-patterned curtain, each privately wondering if they'd finally found what they hadn't even known they were looking for. Not love. Not yet. But something simpler and more necessary, a place to rest, a chance to heal, and someone who asked for nothing more than honest work and decent company. The lamp burned low as the night deepened, and somewhere in the forest, that same owl called again, a sound that would become familiar to them both in the weeks to come, marking the rhythm of their new, shared existence. 2 weeks had passed since the auction, and the cabin had transformed in ways Rowan couldn't have imagined. He stood in the doorway just after dawn, watching Leora move about the small space with quiet efficiency. She'd already made chicory coffee, the aroma filling the cabin, and was kneading dough for the day's bread. Wildflowers sat in an old tin can on the table, purple asters and goldenrod she'd gathered yesterday while he worked. "You're staring," she said without turning around, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Just admiring the changes," he admitted, stepping inside. His shirts hung on pegs, no longer the bachelor's heap they'd been, each one properly mended with tiny, even stitches. She'd patched his work pants with pieces cut from flour sacks, somehow making the repairs look intentional rather than desperate. "Place hasn't looked this good since, well, ever." She turned, flour dusting her hands, that half-smile she'd started allowing herself pulling at the unmarred side of her face. A fair trade for room and board. It had become their pattern, this gentle deflection of anything that might be mistaken for affection. Yet Rowan found himself inventing reasons to return to the cabin midday, claiming forgotten tools or the need to check measurements. Each time, he'd find some small improvement, curtains now hung at the windows, made from the same flour sacks she used for patches, dried herbs bundled and hanging from the rafters, his only book, Pilgrim's Progress, moved from its dusty shelf to the table where she could read it by lamplight. "Thought we might go foraging today," he suggested, pouring himself coffee from the blue speckled pot. "Saw some late mushrooms near the creek, but I don't know which ones are safe." "I can help with that." She wiped her hands on her apron, another flour sack creation. "My father taught me, said a doctor should know what might cure and what might kill." They set out after breakfast, Rowan carrying a basket while Leora led the way with surprising confidence through the forest. She pointed out yellowfoot chanterelles and oyster mushrooms growing on dead logs, carefully explaining how to distinguish them from dangerous lookalikes. Her knowledge ran deeper than just mushrooms. She identified wild ginger for stomach ailments, willow bark for fever, echinacea for winter colds. "You really were a doctor's daughter," Rowan marveled as she carefully harvested roots, leaving enough for the plant to survive. "I assisted him for years," Leora said, her voice carrying a mix of pride and sorrow. "Mother died when I was 12, so I became his nurse, secretary, and student all at once. I can set bones, stitch wounds, birth babies, though I pray you won't need most of those skills." "What happened to him?" Rowan asked gently. "Pneumonia, 3 winters ago, after he died. I had no protection, no standing. A woman alone with medical knowledge. Some called it unnatural. That's how I ended up working for the Morrisons, as a cook and housekeeper. They didn't know about my training, and I kept it that way." They worked in comfortable silence after that, filling the basket with nature's bounty. Rowan noticed how Leora moved through the forest sure-footed despite her worn boots, reading the landscape like one of his books. When they stopped by the creek to rest, she surprised him by laughing at a squirrel's antics as it tried to manage a too large pine cone. The sound stopped him cold. It was the first time he'd heard pure joy from her, unguarded and genuine. She must have noticed his stare because the laugh faded, replaced by self-consciousness. I'm sorry, I... Don't apologize, Rowan said quickly. It's just... It's good to hear you happy. This place has been too quiet for too long. That evening, after supper, they fell into what was becoming another routine. Liora sat mending one of his shirts while Rowan read aloud from Pilgrim's Progress, his deep voice filling the cabin. They'd reached the part where Christian meets Hopeful, and Rowan was doing different voices for each character, making Liora smile behind her sewing. Now I saw in my dream, he read, that Christian and Hopeful went on together till they came to a pleasant river, which David the king called the River of God. He paused, glancing up to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What is it? My father used to read aloud in the evenings, she said softly. Different books, medical texts mostly, but sometimes stories. I haven't heard anyone read since he died. Would you rather I didn't? No, she said quickly. Please continue. It's nice. Feeling like a home again. The words hung between them, delicate as the spider webs that caught morning dew. Home. Neither had said it before, but the cabin had indeed become that, not just a shelter or arrangement, but something warmer. Rowan continued reading, but his mind wandered to the changes these 2 weeks had brought, not just to his cabin, but to his carefully ordered existence. He'd grown used to her presence, the soft sounds of her moving about in the morning, the way she hummed unconsciously while cooking, how she'd taken to leaving him notes on his slate about things needed from town salt, thread, more coffee. When he finished the chapter, Liora had completed her mending and was brewing tea from the herbs they'd gathered. She brought him a cup, sweetened with wild honey, and settled in her chair with her own. Tell me about your brother, she said unexpectedly. You mentioned an accident, but nothing more. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea. Thomas was 2 years younger, but you'd never know it. Bigger, stronger, always laughing. We came out here together to make our fortune in timber. Thought we'd be partners forever. He paused, the memory still sharp. There was a widowmaker, a broken branch caught high in a tree. I saw it, called out a warning, but the wind took my voice. It fell just as he was passing under. I'm sorry, Liora said simply, not offering empty platitudes about God's will or time healing all wounds. He's buried on the hill behind the cabin, Rowan continued. I thought about leaving after, but this was our dream. Seemed wrong to abandon it. So you've been alone here 3 years. Until 2 weeks ago. He met her eyes across the small space. It's different now. Better. Like the cabin can breathe again. Leora's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at her tea. I should tell you something, she said. About the posters. The bounty. Someone will come looking eventually. They always do. $50 is too much money for people to ignore. Let them come, Rowan said with quiet firmness. This is my land, my home. You're under my protection now. You don't understand the danger. I understand enough. He set down his cup, leaning forward. You saved my life once, asking nothing in return. Now it's my turn. Besides, he added with a slight smile, anyone who can tell poisonous mushrooms from safe ones is worth keeping around. That surprised another laugh from her, shorter but no less genuine. As the evening deepened, they sat in companionable silence, the lamp burning between them. Each lost in thought, but no longer entirely alone. Outside, the forest settled into night sounds, the rustle of small creatures, the distant call of a barn owl, wind through pine branches. Inside, 2 people who'd forgotten the comfort of companionship were slowly remembering, one shared evening at a time. Same chapter tomorrow, Liora asked as she prepared to retire behind the curtain. If you'd like, Rowan agreed, banking the stove for the night. I would, she said softly. Very much. As he made his way to the lean-to, Rowan found himself looking forward to tomorrow in a way he hadn't in 3 years. Not just another day of cutting and measuring timber, but a day with someone to share it with: morning coffee, afternoon foraging, evening stories. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something precious nonetheless, the tentative rebuilding of two lives that had been broken, carefully pieced together like Lyora's flour sack quilts, each stitch making them stronger than before. Thunder rolled across the forest like a wagon over rough boards, and Leora woke with a strangled cry that brought Rowan from the lean-to at a run. He found her sitting rigid on the bed, hands twisted in the quilt, eyes wide but seeing something far away from the cabin's safety. Leora. He lit the lamp with a sulfur match, keeping his movements slow and calm. You're safe. It's just a storm. She blinked, focusing on his face in the amber light. I'm sorry. I woke you. Storms wake me anyway, he lied, pulling the kettle forward on the stove. How about some tea? She nodded, wrapping the quilt around her shoulders as he coaxed the banked coals back to life. Neither spoke while he prepared the tea, using the wild chamomile and mint they'd gathered. Only when she held the warm tin cup between her hands did her breathing finally steady. It was thunder that night, too, she said quietly. The night I ran from the Morrison ranch. Rowan settled in the chair across from her, patient, as always. The rain began then, pattering against the roof like nervous fingers. I need to tell you everything, Leora continued, staring into her tea. You deserve the truth. All of it. Only if you're ready, she laughed, but it was bitter. I'll never be ready, but you should know what kind of danger I've brought to your door. The story came in pieces, like ice breaking on a river. Rancher Morrison had hired her after her father died. Desperate for any work, his son, Clayton Morrison, had taken an interest she didn't return. The night he cornered her in the kitchen, she'd fought back with a paring knife, leaving him with a gash on his arm and her with the scar that now marked her face. He said I'd remember who I belonged to every time I looked in a mirror, she whispered, unconsciously touching the raised line. 2 weeks later, old Morrison got sick. I tried to tell him the pork had turned, the color was off. The smell wrong, but he was stubborn. Said I was trying to coddle him. He died within 3 days, fevered and delirious. Clayton saw his chance. He claimed I'd poisoned his father, that I was a witch who'd cursed their ranch. But surely the Dr. Holcomb was away, visiting his daughter in Denver. By the time he returned, Clayton had already sworn out a warrant. He had witnesses' ranch hands he'd threatened or bribed. The sheriff believed him, or at least believed the $50 bounty Clayton posted would keep things quiet. She pulled a worn piece of paper from beneath her pillow, unfolding it with shaking hands. Her own face stared back from a wanted poster, though the sketch made her look harsh and dangerous. Wanted Leora Hale. Poisoning. Witchcraft. $50 reward. Rowan took the poster, studying it in the lamplight. Then, without hesitation, he stood and fed it to the stove. The paper curled and blackened, Leora's sketched face disappearing into ash. That's not who you are to me, he said simply, returning to his chair. Rowan, you don't understand. I've been sold 4 times because of that poster. Each time. I think I've found safety, but someone always recognizes me, or grows suspicious of the scar. The last man, Garrett, kept me for 3 months before his wife saw the poster in town. She was terrified, thought I'd poisoned them all in their sleep. Garrett took me to the auction in the middle of the night, put that sack over my head so no one would ask questions. And the authorities, haven't you tried to clear your name? With what proof Clayton Morrison is rich, respected? His father is dead, and I'm just a scarred woman with no family, no standing. Who would believe me? The rain intensified, drumming harder against the roof. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he shifted his chair closer to hers. I believe you, he said. And I've got something to tell you, too. Now it was his turn to stare into the fire. You know my brother died in a logging accident. What I didn't say was that it was my fault. We were racing to see who could fell more trees before sunset, stupid competition between brothers. I was rushing, didn't check the overhead branches properly before making my cut. The widowmaker that killed him. I created it. Rowan? No. I've lived with it for 3 years, he continued. The isolation out here isn't just because I like the quiet. It's penance. Or was, until you arrived. He met her eyes then. These past weeks, I've remembered what it feels like to be more than just guilt and work. You've brought something back to life in this place. In me. 2 broken people hiding in the woods, Leora said with a sad smile. Maybe. Or maybe 2 people who understand that sometimes the worst wounds are the ones nobody can see. He reached across the small space between them, covering her hand with his. That bounty hunter will come. You're right about that. But when he does, we'll be ready. You saved my life at that creek. You've saved it again these past weeks, though in a different way. I'm not letting anyone take you back to that hell. Leora turned her hand under his, their fingers intertwining. I don't want to bring trouble to you. Trouble came the day Thomas died. This is something else. This is choosing to fight for something worthwhile. They sat like that as the storm raged outside, hands clasped across the narrow space between their chairs. Finally, Leora spoke again, telling him about the year of running the farm family who'd kept her for 2 months until the harvest was done, then sold her when they didn't need the extra hands, the elderly couple who'd been kind until their son visited and recognized her scar, the brutal week with a man who'd bought her thinking the scar meant she'd be grateful for any attention. Each time, I thought about ending it, she admitted. Finding a cliff or a deep pool and just stopping. But something kept me going. Stubbornness. Maybe. Or spite. Or strength, Rowan corrected. The same strength that pulled a drowning man from a flood. That was different. That was instinct. No, that was character. Same as speaking your name at that auction, holding your dignity when they tried to strip it away. The storm was passing, the thunder growing distant. Dawn wasn't far off, painting the edges of the window gray. They'd talked through the night, sharing wounds that had festered in silence for too long. What do we do now? Leora asked. Now, we prepare, Rowan said, finally releasing her hand to add wood to the stove. I know the sheriff in town, Jim Clayton. He's fair. If we could find proof of your innocence, and his wife. Margaret, she's got a keen eye for truth and no patience for bullies. Clayton. Leora's face paled. That was Morrison's son's name. Clayton Morrison. Rowan frowned. Common enough name, but we'll be careful. In the meantime, you stay here when I go to town. We keep things normal. Quiet. Let anyone watching think we're just another frontier couple trying to make it through. Are we? Leora asked softly. A couple. He paused in his movements, considering. We're 2 people sharing space and time, helping each other heal. What we become, well, that's not for anyone else to decide. Is it? She smiled then. The first full smile he'd seen that involved her whole face, scar and all. No, it's not. As the sun rose, painting the cabin warm gold, they moved into their morning routine, but something had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained had closed. When Leora handed him his coffee, their fingers brushed and neither pulled away. When Rowan read the day's measurements from his slate, he stood close enough that she could feel his warmth. They were no longer 2 strangers sharing a cabin out of necessity. They were partners now, united against whatever storm might come weather, bounty hunters or the ghosts of their pasts. The truth had been spoken, the worst revealed, and somehow they were both still standing. "Thank you," Leora said as Rowan prepared to head out for the day's cutting. "For listening. For believing me." "Thank you for trusting me with it," he replied. "We're going to get through this. Leora. Together." She watched him walk toward the timber stand, axe over his shoulder, and for the first time in over a year, she believed that might actually be true. The wanted poster was ash, but the threat remained real. Yet standing in the doorway of this simple cabin, watching this quiet man who'd chosen to stand with her, Leora felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope. The storm had passed, leaving the forest fresh and gleaming with raindrops. And in its wake, two wounded souls had finally found the courage to stop running from their pains and face them together instead. The necessity of winter supplies could no longer be postponed. November's chill had settled into the mountains, and Rowan's monthly trip to town was already a week overdue. He'd been reluctant to take Leora, knowing the risks, but she'd insisted with quiet firmness. "I can't hide forever," she'd said that morning, pinning her hair carefully to minimize the scar's visibility. "And people need to see us together, normal-like. Hiding only makes folks more suspicious." Now, as their wagon rolled down Main Street, Rowan felt every eye upon them. Men paused their conversations outside the barber shop. Women gathered their children closer, and curtains twitched in windows above the shops. Leora sat straight beside him, wearing her best calico dress, faded but clean, with a bonnet she'd fashioned from scraps. "Easy," he murmured, feeling the tension in her posture. "We're just folks buying supplies." Hutchins's General Store stood at the corner of Main and Second, its painted sign proclaiming "Fair prices, honest weights" in gold letters. The pickle barrel by the entrance gave off its familiar vinegary tang as they passed. Inside, the store was dim despite the afternoon sun. Shelves packed floor to ceiling with goods, bolts of fabric, tools, medicines, preserves. Mr. Hutchins looked up from his ledger, his expression cooling when he recognized them. "McCade and guest." "Miss Hale," Rowan corrected evenly. "We need supplies for winter." The storekeeper's eyes lingered on Leora's face, searching for the scar beneath her bonnet's shadow. "I suppose money's money," he muttered, pulling out his order book. "What'll you need?" They moved through the store methodically: flour, salt, coffee beans for the hand-crank grinder, lamp oil, matches. Leora studied the bolt fabrics while Rowan discussed lumber prices with Hutchins, both pretending not to notice the three women who'd entered and now huddled by the display of hat pins. "That's her," one whispered, not quite softly enough. "The scarred woman from the auction. Bought for $2. I heard. Like livestock." Well, what else could someone like that expect with that mark on her face? She's lucky anyone would take her. Rowan started to turn, anger flashing across his features, but Leora touched his arm lightly. A warning, a plea. He forced himself to continue examining the new McClary's catalog, though his hands gripped it white-knuckled. The women grew bolder, moving closer. Mrs. Patterson, the bank manager's wife, addressed Leora directly. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Though, of course, everyone knows who you are." "The auction woman." Leora turned slowly, lifting her chin. "Miss Hale," she said quietly. "Leora Hale." "Yes, well." Mrs. Patterson's nose wrinkled as if she'd smelled something distasteful. "We run a respectable town here. There are certain standards." "Indeed there are." A new voice cut through the tension. Margaret Clayton, the sheriff's wife, swept into the store with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, silver-streaked hair pinned severely, wearing a practical wool dress. "Standards like treating all people with basic Christian charity." Mrs. Patterson flushed. "Margaret, surely you don't approve of this arrangement?" "What arrangement would that be?" Mrs. Clayton's voice carried steel wrapped in silk. Mr. McCade here is a respectable businessman who's been supplying quality lumber to this town for 3 years. If he chooses to hire household help, that's his business. Household help, Mrs. Patterson sputtered. She was bought at auction, as was my own grandmother, Mrs. Clayton said calmly. Indentured from Ireland, sold to pay for passage. She worked 7 years to earn her freedom, then married my grandfather and raised 8 children. Are you suggesting my family lacks respectability? The women retreated, muttering excuses about other errands. Mrs. Clayton watched them leave before turning to Leora with surprising warmth. Miss Hale, I apologize for our town's lack of manners. Small places breed small minds sometimes. Thank you, ma'am, Leora managed, clearly startled by the defense. Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Clayton's sharp eyes studied Leora's face, taking in the partially hidden scar without flinching. You're the young woman who worked for the Morrisons, aren't you? Leora went rigid. Rowan stepped closer, protective. Ma'am, peace, Mr. McCade. I mean no harm. Mrs. K. Clayton glanced around the store, then lowered her voice. My husband's cousin practiced medicine down in Cedar Ridge, near the Morrison Ranch. Dr. Holcomb. He's retired now, lives with his daughter in Denver, but we still correspond. I don't understand, Leora said carefully. Dr. Holcomb wrote me about the Morrison situation. He had concerns about the official story. Said he'd examined the body himself when he returned from Denver, despite it already being buried. The symptoms didn't match poisoning. She paused meaningfully. They matched spoiled meat. Leora's breath caught. He said that he'd testify to it. I can't speak for him, but I can write to him. If someone were to need his testimony for, say, clearing their name, I imagine he'd make the journey. Mrs. Clayton pulled out a small card from her reticule. This is our address. If you need anything at all, you come see me. Why would you help me? Leora asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because I've got eyes, child. I can see guilt and innocence clear enough, and you've got the look of someone carrying blame that isn't yours. She patted Leora's hand gently. Besides, Jim and I never had daughters. I've got a weakness for young women in need of mothering. After Mrs. Clayton left, they finished their shopping in relative peace, though whispers followed them. At the counter, Hutchins tallied their purchases with obvious reluctance. That'll be $12.40, he announced, his tone suggesting he'd prefer they couldn't pay. Rowan counted out the money carefully. As Hutchins made change, he said loudly enough for the other customers to hear, This is Miss Hale, and she's with me. Anyone has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. The store fell silent. Rowan wasn't a large man, but 3 years of swinging an axe had given him a laborer's build, and his quiet intensity suggested deeper strengths. No one met his challenge. As they loaded the wagon, Leora's hands trembled slightly. You shouldn't have done that. Made yourself a target. Already did that at the auction, Rowan replied, helping her onto the wagon seat. Might as well make it clear where I stand. The ride home began in tense silence, but as the town fell behind and the forest embraced them, Leora finally relaxed. Mrs. Clayton seems formidable, she ventured. She's the real authority in town. Rowan agreed. Jim might be sheriff, but Margaret Clayton's word carries more weight than any badge. If she's on your side. It's more than I've had in a year, Leora finished. That Dr. Holcomb, he was kind when he visited the ranch. Professional. If he truly noticed the symptoms. We'll write to him, Rowan decided. Tonight. Get his account in writing. They were just entering the deepest part of the forest when Leora spoke again. In the store, when you took my hand? Too forward? Rowan asked, though he didn't sound apologetic. No. She looked at him sideways, a small smile playing at her lips. It was Nice. Being claimed that way. Not as property, but as someone worth protecting. You're worth more than protecting, Rowan said quietly. You're worth fighting for. The cabin appeared through the trees, smoke still trickling from the chimney where they'd banked the fire that morning. It looked welcoming, safe, like home. As Rowan helped Leora down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she said, for today, for standing up for me. Partners, remember? He replied. We stand together or not at all. That evening, as they unpacked supplies and Leora organized her new sewing notions, Rowan penned a careful letter to Dr. Holcomb in Denver. They worked in companionable quiet, the day's tensions slowly easing. The town might whisper and judge, but here in their cabin, they were building something stronger than gossip, a foundation of trust, respect, and growing affection. Read to me, Leora asked as she prepared their evening meal. I want to know what happens to Christian and Hopeful. They. Rowan smiled, reaching for the worn book. They're about to face the giant despair. But don't worry, hope finds a way through. It usually does. Leora agreed, and for the first time, she truly meant it. Outside, early snow began to fall, dusting the forest in white. Winter was coming, bringing its own challenges. But inside the cabin, warmed by the stove and something deeper than fire, two people were discovering that together they could weather any storm. The horse's approach echoed through the pre-dawn stillness, measured hoofbeats of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Rowan woke instantly, 3 years of solitary living having trained him to notice any break in the forest's rhythm. Through the lean-to's small window, he saw a lone rider approaching, rifle prominent in his saddle scabbard, a Colt Peacemaker visible on his hip. Bounty hunter. The bearing was unmistakable. Rowan pulled on his boots and canvas pants quickly, grabbing his axe as if heading for morning chores. He intercepted the rider 30 yards from the cabin, where the wood-splitting stump stood surrounded by scattered kindling. Morning, Rowan called out casually, embedding the axe in the stump with practiced ease. You're out early. The rider dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near but not on his weapon. He was younger than Rowan expected, perhaps 30, with the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors and the cold eyes of someone who traded in human misery. Jake Thornton, the man said, not offering his hand. I'm looking for someone. Official business. Must be important to bring you out here before the sun's properly up, Rowan observed, maintaining his easy stance while noting every detail: the brass bullets in the gun belt, the wanted posters wrapped in oilcloth protruding from his saddlebag, the way Thornton positioned himself to watch both Rowan and the cabin. $50 important, Thornton replied, pulling out the familiar poster. Even in the dim light, Leora's sketched face was recognizable. Woman named Leora Hale, poisoner, killed a rancher down Cedar Ridge Way. Rowan made a show of studying the poster, though his blood ran cold seeing it again. Poisoner. That's serious business. Dead serious. She's been sold at auctions across 3 counties, but keeps disappearing. Trail led here. Someone said they saw you at the last auction in town, buying a woman with a sack on her head. I was at the auction, Rowan admitted easily. Bought a plowshare and some used tools. Don't recall any woman with a sack that would be something to remember. Thornton's eyes narrowed. You live alone out here. Have for 3 years, since my brother died. Rowan gestured toward the hill. Buried him yonder. Lonely life, but honest work. Mind if I look around? I'd mind very much, Rowan said, his tone still friendly but firmer. Man's home is private, even in the wilderness, especially in the wilderness. Not hiding anything, are you? Just protecting my privacy, same as any man would. Rowan shifted slightly, his movement casual but putting him between Thornton and the cabin. You're looking for someone worth $50? Must be dangerous. I just cut wood. Through the cabin window, barely visible, the curtain moved slightly. Leora was awake, listening. Rowan willed her to stay hidden, to trust him. Thornton studied him for a long moment, Funny thing about dangerous women, they don't always look it. This one's got a scar, face all marked up, makes her memorable. You sure you haven't seen anyone like that? I go to town once a month for supplies, Rowan said. See plenty of folks, but a scarred woman who's also a poisoner that I'd remember. Some say she's a witch, Thornton added, watching Rowan's reaction. Cursed the ranch after she killed Morrison. Rowan allowed himself a skeptical snort. Witches. What is this? The Salem trials. It's 1882, Mr. Thornton, not the Dark Ages. You'd be surprised what people believe when they're scared. Thornton walked slowly toward his horse, but stopped beside the cabin's rain barrel, noting the small things, 2 tin cups drying on the window ledge, laundry on the line that included a patched dress. Looks like you might not be as alone as you claim. I take in washing sometimes, Rowan lied smoothly. Extra money for supplies. Times are hard. That's so. Thornton mounted his horse with the fluid ease of someone who lived in the saddle. Well, here's the thing, Mr. McCade. Rowan McCade. Mr. McCade, I've been hunting bounties for 5 years. I know when someone's lying to me. Maybe you're not harboring this woman now, but you know something. He touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. I'll be around town for a spell, asking questions. If I find out you've been less than honest, things could get unpleasant. Is that a threat? It's information. $50 is a lot of money. But there's principle involved too. Justice for a murdered man. You understand justice, don't you, Mr. McCade? I understand it fine, Rowan replied steadily. I also understand that justice and bounty hunting aren't always the same thing. Thornton's smile was cold. Maybe not, but they pay the same. He turned his horse, then looked back. I'll be checking all the cabins in these woods. If that woman's here, I'll find her, and anyone helping her will answer for it too. Aiding a fugitive is a crime. Mr. McCade, remember that. Rowan stood perfectly still until the hoofbeats faded into the forest. Only then did he allow his shoulders to slump, the tension draining out of him. He entered the cabin to find Leora pressed against the wall beside the window, her face pale but composed. He knows, she said simply. He suspects. That's different. He'll be back. Yes. Rowan moved to the stove, automatically starting the morning coffee, though his hands shook slightly. But we've got time. He'll check other cabins first. Ask around town. Give us maybe 3 days before he circles back. I should leave, Leora said, though her voice cracked on the words. Draw him away from you. No. The word came out harsher than intended. Rowan turned to face her, crossing the small space between them. We've been through this. You're not running anymore. But if he finds me here, then we deal with it. Together. He took her hands, feeling them tremble in his. Mrs. Clayton said she'd write to Dr. Holcomb. We need his testimony. If we can prove your innocence, if, Leora interrupted bitterly. That's a big word to hang our lives on. It's better than running? Better than spending your whole life looking over your shoulder? She searched his face, looking for doubt and finding none. Why does this matter so much to you? I'm nobody to you. Just a woman you bought for $2. Don't say that, Rowan said firmly. You're not nobody. You're the woman who saved my life. You're the person who brought warmth back to this cabin. You're... He paused, struggling with words he wasn't ready to say. You're important. To me. Leora's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. Rowan. We're going to fight this, he continued. Mrs. Clayton offered help, we'll take it. We'll get the doctor's statement. We'll find those ranch hands who know the truth. We'll clear your name properly, legally. And if we can't, he was quiet for a moment, then pulled her gently against his chest, feeling her stiffen in surprise before slowly relaxing into the embrace. It was the first time they'd held each other, and it felt both foreign and absolutely right. Then we run together, he said into her hair. North to Canada, maybe. Or west to California. Somewhere they won't follow, but only as a last resort. First, we fight. She pulled back enough to look up at him. You'd give up everything, your cabin, your work, your life here. What life, Bob? He asked softly. Before you came, I was just existing, going through motions, cutting wood, counting days. That's not living. Leora, what we've built these past weeks, that's living. A knock at the door made them spring apart. Rowan grabbed his axe while Leora retreated behind the curtain. But the voice that called out was familiar and welcome. Mr. McCade, it's Margaret Clayton. I've brought news. Rowan opened the door to find the sheriff's wife on horseback, a leather satchel across her saddle. She dismounted with surprising agility, her sharp eyes taking in Rowan's defensive stance and the curtained corner of the cabin. May I come in? What I have to say concerns you both. Once inside, with the door firmly closed, Mrs. Clayton produced a letter from her satchel. From Dr. Holcomb. He's agreed to provide a sworn statement about Morrison's death. More than that, he's willing to travel here to testify if needed. Thank God, Leora breathed, emerging from behind the curtain. Don't thank him yet, Mrs. Clayton warned. That bounty hunter, Thornton, has been asking questions in town. He's thorough. He'll trace you here eventually. He already has, Rowan admitted. Left not 20 minutes ago. Mrs. Clayton's expression hardened. Then we have less time than I thought. Listen carefully. My husband may be sheriff, but even he can't simply dismiss a bounty without cause. We need evidence, witnesses, a proper legal proceeding. How long will that take? Leora asked. 2 weeks, minimum. Dr. Holcomb can't travel until then. His daughter's about to give birth. But when he arrives, with his testimony and the medical records he kept, we can petition the circuit judge to review your case. Thornton won't wait 2 weeks, Rowan said grimly. No, he won't. Mrs. Clayton stood, straightening her riding gloves, which is why you need to be very careful. Stay together, stay alert. And if things become desperate, get word to me. Jim may have to uphold the law as written, but there's nothing saying I can't help friends in need. After she left, Rowan and Leora stood in the sudden quiet of the cabin, both aware that everything had changed. The hunter was circling, time was running short, and their peaceful sanctuary had become a trap. 2 weeks, Leora said hollowly. We'll never make it 2 weeks. We will, Rowan said with more confidence than he felt. We've come this far. That evening, they prepared for siege. Rowan brought his bedroll into the cabin. Sleeping in the lean-to was no longer safe. They organized supplies, planned escape routes, discussed contingencies. But when night fell, they sat together by the stove, no longer reading, just drawing comfort from each other's presence. Whatever happens, Leora said quietly, I want you to know these weeks with you have been the happiest I've had in years. Maybe ever. They're not ending, Rowan said firmly. This is just the beginning. But outside, they both heard a wolf howling in the distance. Or perhaps it wasn't a wolf at all, but a hunter signaling to others that prey had been found. Either way, they moved closer together, 2 people against the world, waiting for dawn and whatever it might bring. The sheriff's office occupied the ground floor of the town's courthouse, a modest brick building that tried to project more authority than a frontier town could actually claim. In the pre-dawn darkness, Rowan and Leora slipped through the back entrance where Margaret Clayton waited, her husband beside her looking deeply uncomfortable with the clandestine nature of the meeting. This is highly irregular, Sheriff Jim Clayton muttered. But his wife's sharp look silenced further protest. He was a decent man, tall and graying, who'd held his position for 10 years by being fair rather than harsh. Justice is often irregular, James, Margaret replied crisply. Now, Dr. Holcomb is waiting in your private office. They found the doctor hunched over Jim's roll-top desk, writing in a leather journal by lamplight. He was older than Leora remembered, his hair now completely white, but his eyes remained sharp and kind. When he saw her, he stood immediately. "Miss Hale, I've thought of you often since that terrible business." He glanced at her scar with professional interest rather than revulsion. "That wasn't there when you worked for Morrison." "His son's handiwork," Leora said quietly. "After I refused his advances." Dr. Holcomb's expression darkened. "I suspected young Clayton was involved somehow. His grief over his father's death seemed performed rather than felt." "Doctor, what can you tell us about Morrison's death?" Rowan asked, keeping one hand protectively on Leora's shoulder. The doctor opened his journal, finding a marked page. "I was in Denver when Morrison died, visiting my daughter. When I returned, he'd already been buried, but I insisted on examining the body. Professional courtesy, I claimed, though really I had doubts." He showed them his notes, written in precise medical script. The symptoms Clayton described: gradual weakening, confusion, stomach pains could suggest poisoning, but the body showed clear signs of acute food poisoning. Spoiled pork. Specifically, the tissue samples I took confirmed it. "You kept tissue samples." Sheriff Clayton leaned forward, suddenly engaged. "Standard practice when cause of death is uncertain. I preserved them in alcohol." Dr. Holcomb produced a small wooden case from his bag, revealing several glass vials with cork stoppers. "These would hold up in any court." "But why didn't you say something then?" Leora asked, her voice tight with years of injustice. "I tried. I went to the Cedar Ridge sheriff, but Clayton Morrison had already sworn out the warrant, said you'd confessed before fleeing." Two ranch hands back at his story. The doctor's shoulders sagged. "I was told the matter was closed. A young woman's word against a grieving son and witnesses. They laughed me out of the office." "The ranch hands," Rowan said thoughtfully. "Do you remember their names?" "Pete Grayson and Miguel Reyes. Good men, both of them. I treated Pete's son for scarlet fever once. Never understood why they'd lie." Margaret Clayton had been writing steadily. Now she looked up. "I know where Pete Grayson is. He works at the lumber mill north of town. Lost his ranch after Morrison died. Interesting timing. Wouldn't you say you think Clayton Morrison threatened them?" her husband asked. "Or bought them? Or both?" Margaret stood, her bearing military straight. "James, we need those men's testimony." The sheriff hesitated, torn between duty and justice. "The warrant's still legal. If Thornton finds her—" "Then you'll do your duty," his wife said firmly. "But until then, perhaps you could be very thorough in your investigation. Very, very thorough." A ghost of a smile crossed the sheriff's weathered face. Investigation could take time. Lots of witnesses to interview, evidence to gather. Might even need to send queries to Cedar Ridge, confirm some details. "How long?" Rowan asked. "Week, maybe 10 days. But Thornton won't wait for official proceedings. He'll grab her the moment he confirms she's here." "Then we need those ranch hands today," Margaret declared. "Doctor, will you come with us to the mill? Your presence might encourage honesty." They divided into two groups. The women would stay in the sheriff's office, hidden in the back room, while the men rode to the lumber mill. It was risky. Thornton might be watching, but time was running out. The mill sat 5 miles north, powered by the same creek where Leora had once saved Rowan. Pete Grayson was there, looking older and more worn than his 40 years. When he saw Dr. Holcomb, his face went pale. "Doc." He removed his cap, crushing it in his hands. "Didn't expect to see you." "Pete." The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "We need to talk about Morrison's death." "I don't know nothing about your boy's doing well." Dr. Holcomb interrupted. "Grew tall, I heard. Working the mill with you." "Yes, sir. He's a good boy. Be a shame if he grew up thinking his father was a liar." Pete's face crumbled. He looked around the noisy mill. then gestured toward a quiet spot behind the wood stacks. Once there, the words poured out like water through a broken dam. Clayton Morrison came to us the night his father died. Said if we didn't back his story about the girl poisoning the old man, he'd make sure we never worked in the county again. Said he'd burn my ranch, hurt my family. Pete's hands shook. I got a wife, 3 kids. What was I supposed to do? The right thing, Sheriff Clayton said quietly. Even when it's hard. Easy for you to say. Sheriff, you got the law on your side. All I had was Clayton's word that he'd destroy everything I'd built. What about Miguel Reyes? Rowan asked. Pete's expression darkened further. Miguel tried to refuse. Said Miss Leora was a good woman. That everyone knew the old man ate that spoiled meat against her warnings. Clayton had some men beat Miguel so bad he can't work no more. Lives with his sister in Cedar Ridge now, half crippled. Would you testify to this? Dr. Holcomb asked. Tell the truth now. Pete was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. My boy's old enough to understand now. Old enough to know his pa's been carrying a lie that hurt an innocent woman. Yes, I'll testify. It's time. They returned to town with Pete's sworn statement, properly witnessed and sealed. But as they approached the courthouse, Rowan saw Thornton's horse tied outside. His blood went cold. Inside, they found the bounty hunter in heated discussion with the sheriff, while Margaret stood protectively near the back room where Leora hid. I know she's here, Thornton was saying. The scarred woman. Someone saw McCade with a woman in town last week. Lots of women in town, Sheriff Clayton said mildly. Some even have scars. Life's hard on the frontier. Don't play games with me, Sheriff. That warrant's legal. You're obligated to help me. I'm obligated to uphold the law, the sheriff corrected, which includes investigating whether that warrant was properly sworn out in the first place. Thornton's hand moved toward his gun. What are you saying? I'm saying that Dr. Holcomb here has raised some interesting questions about Morrison's death. Medical evidence that suggests food poisoning, not murder. And now we have a witness recanting his original testimony. The bounty hunter's face flushed red. You can't just ignore a warrant because I can investigate it. Sheriff Clayton interrupted, his own hand now resting on his weapon. That's my job. And until that investigation is complete, I'd appreciate it if you'd stop harassing my citizens. McCade's hiding her. I know it. Do you have proof? Have you seen her? Thornton's jaw clenched. Not yet. Then you've got nothing but suspicion. And that's not enough for me to violate a man's property rights. The sheriff stood, using his height to advantage. Mr. Thornton, I'm giving you fair warning. Don't take the law into your own hands. If you find actual evidence, bring it to me. Otherwise, leave people alone. Thornton stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Only then did Leora emerge from the back room, trembling but resolute. He won't stop, she said. Men like him never do. No, Margaret Clayton agreed. But now we have ammunition to fight back. Pete's testimony. The doctor's evidence, it's enough to challenge the warrant. The circuit judge arrives in 4 days. Sheriff Clayton added. We can present everything then. Get the warrant dismissed properly. 4 days, Rowan repeated. Can we keep her safe that long? Not at your cabin, the sheriff said bluntly. Thornton will be watching, but there might be another way. Margaret smiled, understanding her husband's thought. Our house. We have a proper guest room, and Thornton wouldn't dare violate the sheriff's own home. I couldn't impose, Leora began. It's not an imposition, it's strategy, Margaret said firmly. Besides, I could use help with the church bazaar preparations. Nothing says innocent quite like organizing a church fundraiser. That evening, they moved Leora to the Clayton house, a modest but comfortable 2-story home behind the courthouse. Rowan was reluctant to leave her, but Margaret shooed him out with motherly authority. She's safe here. You go back to your cabin. Act normal. Let Thornton watch you doing ordinary things. The more boring you appear, the more likely he is to look elsewhere. Over the next 3 days, they gathered more evidence. Miguel Reyes, located through the doctor's connections, provided a written statement despite his injuries. 2 more ranch hands came forward, admitting they'd suspected the truth but been too frightened to speak. Even Morrison's cook, now working in Denver, sent a letter describing how she'd warned about the spoiled meat. The night before the judge's arrival, they gathered in the Clayton parlor, Rowan, Lyora, the sheriff and his wife, Dr. Holcomb, and Pete Grayson. The evidence was overwhelming. The witness statements properly notarized, the medical proof preserved and documented. "It's enough," Sheriff Clayton said with satisfaction. "More than enough. That warrant will be dissolved and you'll be free." Leora sat quietly, hardly daring to believe it. Rowan took her hand, no longer caring who saw. "What about Clayton Morrison?" she asked. "He swore out a false warrant, destroyed lives. That's for the Cedar Ridge authorities to handle," the sheriff said. "But with this evidence, I suspect young Mr. Morrison will be facing his own legal troubles soon." Dr. Holcomb stood to leave, pausing beside Leora. "I'm sorry I couldn't help sooner. Fear makes cowards of us all sometimes." "You're helping now," she said. "That's what matters." As the others departed, Rowan lingered on the Clayton's porch with Leora, both aware that tomorrow would change everything one way or another. "After it's over," he said quietly. "After you're free. What then?" She looked up at him, no longer hiding her scar in the moonlight. "I hadn't thought past surviving." "Well, think about it now. You could go anywhere, be anything. No more running." "What if I don't want to go anywhere?" she asked softly. "What if I've already found where I want to be?" Rowan's answer was to pull her close, holding her as he had that night in the cabin when Thornton first appeared. Tomorrow would bring justice or more struggle, but tonight they had the promise of a future finally within reach. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said against her hair, "we face it together." "Together," she agreed, and for the first time in over a year, she truly believed she might survive to see another spring. The morning sun cast long shadows through the pines as Rowan stood at his cabin door, watching Leora move about the small space with a contentment he'd never seen before. 3 days had passed since Judge Harrison dissolved the warrant, declaring it founded on malicious falsehood and maintained through intimidation. Clayton Morrison had fled Cedar Ridge before he could be arrested, and Jake Thornton had left town without his bounty, muttering curses about corrupt lawmen. Now, in the quiet of their own sanctuary, Rowan knew the moment had come. "Lyora," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that made her pause in her breakfast preparations. She turned, flour on her hands from the biscuit dough, and found him standing awkwardly by the table, something hidden behind his back. "What is it?" Concern flickered across her features. "Is someone coming?" "No, nothing like that." He took a breath, then brought his hand forward, revealing a small cloth bundle. "I rode to town yesterday while you were gathering herbs. There was something I needed to do." She wiped her hands on her apron, the same flour sack creation she'd made weeks ago, and approached slowly. When he unwrapped the cloth, a simple gold band caught the morning light. "It's not much," he said quickly, words tumbling over each other. "The traveling merchant only had a few. And I know we haven't courted proper. And you're free now to go anywhere you want." "Rowan," she interrupted gently. "And I'm just a lumberjack with a one-room cabin and not much to offer except hard work. And Rowan." Firmer this time. He stopped, meeting her eyes. The scar on her face caught the light, no longer hidden, no longer a source of shame. She'd stopped trying to cover it after the trial, wearing it now like a badge of survival. "Ask me," she said simply. He set the ring on the table and took both her hands in his, calloused palm against calloused palm. Two people who knew work and hardship and the value of simple things. Leora Hale, he said, voice steady now. You saved my life twice, once from drowning in a different way. I bought your freedom for $2, but you gave me something worth more than any money. You gave me a reason to wake up that wasn't just habit. Will you marry me? Not because you need protection or shelter, but because I can't imagine this cabin without you in it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, she said. Though I should point out, Mr. McCade, that I already know your worst habits. You leave wood shavings everywhere. You read too late by lamplight, and you make terrible coffee. And you hang herbs from every rafter until a man can't stand straight. You rearrange my tools when I'm not looking, and you hum off key when you think I'm not listening. He countered, slipping the ring onto her finger. It was slightly large, but she closed her fist to keep it secure. I suppose we're stuck with each other then, she said, and he kissed her there in the morning light, flour transferring from her apron to his shirt, neither of them caring. Margaret Clayton arrived 2 hours later, as if she'd somehow sensed the news from town. She took one look at the ring on Leora's finger and immediately began planning. We'll have it here, she declared, surveying the cabin and its clearing. Your home, where it all began. I'll arrange everything. Mrs.
Clayton, Leora interrupted gently. We don't need anything elaborate, just something simple, quiet.
Nonsense, you've earned a proper celebration. Besides, the whole town's been following your story. They'll want to witness the happy ending. And so, 3 days later, the clearing around Rowan's cabin filled with more people than it had ever held. Tables appeared as if by magic, covered with checkered cloths. Women from town, the same ones who'd whispered in the general store, brought pies and preserves, their earlier judgment replaced by the frontier's quick forgiveness of those proven innocent. Men Rowan had sold lumber to for years shook his hand and offered congratulations. Sheriff Clayton stood ready to officiate, his badge polished for the occasion. Dr. Holcomb had stayed in town specifically for the wedding, and Pete Grayson arrived with his entire family, his son carrying his fiddle for music later. But it was Leora who drew every eye when she emerged from the cabin. Margaret Clayton had somehow procured a blue dress not new, but beautiful, with pearl buttons and lace at the collar. Something borrowed, she'd said with a wink, from my own wedding trunk. Leora had done her hair differently, pinning it up in a style that fully revealed her face, scar and all. When someone had offered powder to cover it, she'd declined. Every part of me is part of our story, she'd said, remembering Rowan's words. The ceremony itself was brief, as frontier weddings tended to be. Sheriff Clayton read from his small leather Bible, the same one he used for swearing in deputies and last rites alike. When he asked if anyone objected, the clearing fell silent except for the wind in the pines and a jay calling from somewhere in the forest. Do you, Rowan McCade, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and hold from this day forward, in sickness and health, prosperity and hardship, until death do you part? I do, Rowan said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. I surely do. And do you, Leora Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and hold from this day forward, in sickness and health, prosperity and hardship, until death do you part? I do, she answered, squeezing his hands, with my whole heart. When Sheriff Clayton pronounced them married, Rowan didn't kiss her immediately. Instead, he touched her scarred cheek gently, then kissed that first, a public declaration that every part of her was precious to him. Only then did he kiss her properly, to cheers and applause from the assembled crowd. The celebration lasted into the evening. Pete Grayson's son played his fiddle while couples danced on the packed earth. Children ran between the tables, stealing cookies and playing tag. Dr. Holcomb regaled a group with medical stories, carefully edited for mixed company. Even Mr. Hutchins from the general store attended, bringing a wedding gift of coffee beans and a new coffee grinder, a peace offering of sorts. As the sun began to set, painting the sky purple and gold, Rowan found Leora standing apart from the crowd, looking out at the forest. Regrets, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Never, she said. leaning back against him. I was just thinking about that auction day. If you'd told me then that I'd be standing here, married, free, surrounded by people who came to celebrate rather than judge, you'd have thought I was touched in the head. Maybe. She turned in his arms, facing him. Or maybe some part of me would have hoped. When you bid those $2, when you looked at me like I was a person and not just damaged goods, that's when the hope started. Margaret Clayton approached, tactful but determined. The sun's setting. Tradition says the couple should be alone now. The crowd began dispersing with much good-natured teasing and well-wishes. Women collected dishes. Men loaded tables onto wagons. Children were rounded up despite protests. Soon, only the Claytons remained. "Thank you," Leora said to Margaret, embracing the older woman, "for everything. For believing me, defending me. This celebration. Family does for family," Margaret said simply. "And that's what you are now. Both of you. Don't forget that." After they left, Rowan and Leora stood alone in their clearing, the cabin door open and welcoming behind them. Evidence of the celebration remained a forgotten ribbon, extra flowers in tin cans, the lingering scent of apple pie. "Mrs. McCade," Rowan said experimentally, "how does that feel?" "Like coming home," she answered. "Like the end of a long, terrible journey and the beginning of something better." They went inside together, no longer needing the rose-patterned curtain that had divided the space. Rowan had already moved it to the window, where it would catch the morning sun. The cabin was the same simple, modest, honest, but it felt different now. Consecrated, somehow, by the promises they'd made. "I need to tell you something," Leora said as they prepared for bed. "Dr. Holcomb offered me work, not officially, since I'm not licensed, but helping with his practice, birthing babies, treating women who might be more comfortable with another woman present. He says with my knowledge and experience, I could make a real difference." "That's wonderful," Rowan said, genuinely pleased. "You'll be brilliant at it." It would mean trips to town, sometimes overnight if there's a difficult birth. "Leora," he took her hands again, the ring now properly sized and secure on her finger. "You're not my prisoner. You never were. Even when I first brought you here. We're partners. If this work calls to you, then you should answer." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying again, but smiling through the tears. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he replied. "We earned this, both of us, through surviving everything that tried to break us." Outside, night settled over the forest, bringing its familiar sounds: owls calling, wind through pine needles, the distant crack of settling wood. Inside, two people who'd found each other through the strangest of circumstances began their married life with the quiet confidence of those who'd already weathered the worst storms. They talked late into the night, making plans, expanding the cabin for the children they hoped would come, planting a larger garden in spring, building a proper root cellar. Practical dreams, modest ones, but theirs to share. When Leora finally fell asleep, her head on Rowan's shoulder, he stayed awake a while longer, marveling at the turn his life had taken. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a lonely man at an auction, bidding $2 on impulse and recognition. Now he was a husband, protector, partner to a woman whose strength humbled him daily. The lamp burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, building their life together, establishing her medical practice, but facing whatever judgments or difficulties the world might offer. But tonight, in their simple cabin in the woods, Rowan McCade and his bride had everything they needed: each other, hard-won freedom, and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. The wedding had been simple, the celebration modest by town standards. But for two people who'd known isolation, persecution, and despair, it was nothing short of miraculous. Love had grown from the rockiest soil, tended with patience and courage, until it bloomed into something neither had dared hope for. As the last ember in the stove faded to darkness, Rowan pulled Leora closer, whispering against her hair, "Welcome home, Mrs. McCade. Welcome home for good." 6 months after their wedding, Rowan and Leora McCade stood watching their neighbors raise the frame of a new room on their cabin. The same townspeople who had once whispered behind Leora's back now worked side by side, their prejudice transformed into protective loyalty. Pete Grayson's confession had sparked a wave of soul-searching in the community. How quickly they'd believed lies, how easily fear had overruled compassion. "Family isn't always blood," Margaret Clayton said, steadying a beam while the men hammered. "Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand by you when the world turns its back." Leora, now assisting Dr. Holcomb with half the births in the county, had delivered Pete Grayson's fourth child just last week. The man had wept with gratitude, knowing he didn't deserve her kindness after his cowardice nearly cost her life. But she'd simply smiled and said, "We all need grace sometimes." The cabin expansion was the community's wedding gift, delayed but heartfelt. Each board represented an apology, each nail an acknowledgement that justice required not just law but courage from ordinary people. Watching their neighbors work, Rowan squeezed Leora's hand. From a $2 auction to this moment of belonging, their journey proved that even the gravest injustices could birth the deepest bonds. Have you ever witnessed someone being publicly humiliated or wrongly accused while others stayed silent? What stopped people from speaking up?